It was one of those mornings when the air inside the courtroom felt heavier than usual. Reporters were already seated with their notebooks ready, their cameras set to capture every moment. The public benches were packed, filled with people whispering to each other, wondering why such a young boy had to stand before a judge today. At the center of it all stood a boy who looked too small for the seriousness of the place. His eyes were fixed on the ground, and both his hands were shaking slightly as he held a folded piece of paper. He wasn't in handcuffs, but the weight of what was happening made him look trapped. He had no family sitting behind him, no one waiting to give him comfort or a smile. The courtroom felt like a sea of strangers, all staring, all guessing what could have brought someone his age there. The judge entered, calm and composed as he always was. He had been serving for many years and was known for being strict but fair. People respected him because he rarely showed emotion. He made decisions based on facts, not feelings. Today, however, as he glanced at the boy, something in his expression softened, even if just for a second. It wasn't pity. It was more like curiosity mixed with concern. The prosecutor, a tall man in a dark suit, stood and began to speak about the case. His tone was firm, professional. "Your Honor, this case may seem small compared to others, but it carries importance. The boy before you committed a crime that cannot be overlooked." The words made a few people in the room whisper again. The boy didn't lift his head. He simply stood there, his small shoulders trembling with every sound around him. The defense lawyer, a gentle-looking woman, glanced at him and whispered something softly, maybe to comfort him. The prosecutor continued, explaining how the boy had taken something that didn't belong to him, something from a store late at night. It wasn't a violent act, but it caused a chain of events that led to this trial. He spoke about responsibility, about rules, and about how even the young must face consequences. The judge listened quietly, occasionally writing something down. But his gaze kept returning to the boy, as if searching for something more behind his silence. When it was the defense's turn, the lawyer stood up and began to tell the story from another side, one that wasn't written in the reports. She spoke gently, choosing her words carefully as if she didn't want to break something fragile. "Your Honor," she said, "the boy before you has not had an easy life. He has faced things most children never should. His father left when he was little, and his mother has been sick for many years. He grew up trying to care for her the best he could." A small murmur spread through the audience. The boy still didn't look up, but his hands gripped the paper tighter. The lawyer went on. "He's not here because he's dangerous or careless. He's here because he was desperate. What he did was wrong, yes, but it was born out of fear and helplessness, not greed." The judge leaned slightly forward, listening closely. He had heard thousands of cases in his life, each with its share of pain and excuses. But something about this one made him uneasy. Maybe it was because the boy hadn't spoken a single word since he entered. Maybe it was because of the way he clutched that paper, like it held everything he couldn't say aloud. The lawyer then paused, her voice softening even more. "Your Honor, before this hearing began, he wrote something he wants to read to you." He asked for permission to speak in his own words. The courtroom went silent. The sound of a chair moving or someone clearing their throat felt loud in that quiet. The judge nodded slightly, signaling that the boy could go ahead. The boy looked up for the first time. His eyes were red, not from anger, but from holding back tears. He unfolded the paper slowly, the sound of it echoing faintly across the room. His hands trembled as he tried to find his voice. But before he could speak, the judge said softly, "Take your time, son. There's no rush here." That small kindness seemed to calm him. He took a deep breath, looked down at the paper again, and started reading in a low voice. "I never thought I would stand in a place like this," he began. "I know what I did was wrong. I don't have a big excuse, but I want you to understand why I did it." Every word came out slowly, carefully, as if it carried a piece of his heart. The courtroom, filled with people moments ago whispering and judging, now listened in complete silence. He continued reading. "My mother has been sick for a long time. She couldn't work, and most days she could barely stand. I used to take care of her. I tried to find small jobs, cleaning or helping in shops, but it wasn't enough. She needed medicine, and I didn't have the money. That night I went to get what she needed. I thought if I could just take it once, maybe she'd get better and things would be okay. But I was wrong." He stopped for a moment. His voice cracked as he swallowed hard. The lawyer placed her hand gently on the table in front of him, showing quiet support. He went on. When they caught me, I didn't try to run. I was scared, but I knew I had done wrong. I kept thinking about my mom and how she would feel if she knew. I just wanted her to smile again. That's all. A few people in the courtroom wiped their eyes. The judge sat still, but his jaw tightened slightly. The boy lowered the paper and whispered, "I'm sorry for what I did. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just didn't know what else to do." He stood there quietly after that, holding the paper against his chest like it was the only thing keeping him steady. The judge looked at him for a long time before speaking. His tone was softer now, not as formal as before. "How is your mother doing now?" he asked. The question seemed simple, but it made the boy's eyes fill with tears again. He hesitated before answering. She's not doing well, sir. The doctor said there isn't much they can do anymore. She wanted me to tell you she's sorry too." The judge lowered his gaze. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. He had faced hardened criminals, angry families, and endless arguments in court, but nothing had ever left him so silent. He finally said, "Thank you for telling the truth." Then he turned to the defense lawyer. "We'll take a short break before continuing." The gavel struck once and everyone began to move, but the silence stayed heavy in the air. The judge stood up and quietly walked out of the courtroom, but before leaving, he looked once more at the boy. There was something in that look, something between sorrow and admiration. During the break, people whispered among themselves, some saying the boy deserved punishment, others saying he needed help, not a sentence. But no one could deny that what they had just heard had changed something in the room. The boy sat quietly, his paper folded again, resting on the table. The lawyer whispered to him, "You did well. Whatever happens now, you spoke your truth." He nodded, though his eyes were still full of worry. Outside the courtroom, the judge stood near the window in his chambers, looking out at the cloudy sky. He had seen many gray skies like this before, but today it felt different. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy's words, about the weight of his choices. It made him question how the world could put so much pressure on someone so young. He took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and sighed deeply. He wasn't just a judge at that moment. He was a man thinking about fairness, about compassion, about what justice really meant. When the break ended, everyone returned to their seats. The boy was still sitting quietly, the folded paper in his hands. The judge entered again, his expression calm, but his eyes told a different story. Something inside him had shifted, though no one could yet tell what that meant. The hearing wasn't over and no verdict had been given. But already something powerful had happened in that courtroom. A quiet reminder that behind every case, every law and every judgment, there were human hearts beating, breaking, and hoping to be understood. And as the boy sat there waiting for what would come next, the judge couldn't help but feel that this case would stay with him for the rest of his life. The courtroom was quiet again when everyone returned from the short break. The boy sat at the same place, his hands folded on the table, the paper now tucked safely inside his pocket. His eyes stayed fixed on one spot on the floor, like he was afraid to look up and see the people around him. The defense lawyer leaned close and whispered something to him, maybe telling him to stay calm. The judge entered soon after, his robe flowing slightly as he walked to his seat. His face looked the same as before, calm, collected, unreadable, but something in his eyes had changed. They no longer looked as distant as they had at the start of the hearing. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the boy for a long second before clearing his throat. "We will continue," he said, his voice low but firm. The prosecutor stood again, holding a folder filled with papers. He looked tired now, not angry or harsh, just tired. "Your Honor, the facts remain the same," he began. The boy took property that did not belong to him. Whether or not he intended harm, the law cannot ignore such actions. Justice must be equal for everyone. His words sounded right in principle, but they felt hollow in that moment. Everyone in the courtroom had just heard the boy's story. It was hard to look at him and think only about laws and rules. Still, the prosecutor had to do his job. He continued, describing how the store owner had reacted that night. The boy had entered quietly, taken what he needed, and tried to leave without causing trouble. But the security alarm had gone off and the police were called immediately. The owner had been furious, not because of what was taken, it was something small, but because of the principle of it. The prosecutor said the owner had insisted on pressing charges, saying, "If we excuse one crime, more will follow." The defense lawyer rose to respond. Her tone was calm but firm, and there was something deeply human in her voice. "Your Honor," she said, "I understand the importance of the law. But justice isn't only about punishment. It's also about understanding the truth behind someone's choices. This boy didn't steal out of greed. He did it because he had no one to turn to. He wasn't trying to escape the law. He stayed, he told the truth, and he accepted what he did wrong." The judge nodded slightly, signaling her to continue. She looked at the boy, then back at the judge. When a person has everything taken from them, family, stability, hope, sometimes they act out of fear, not intention. What this boy needs isn't prison. He needs help, guidance, and compassion. The prosecutor didn't interrupt. He simply closed his folder and sat down. The judge turned to the boy again. His voice softened. "Do you understand what's being said here, son?" The boy nodded, his voice quiet. "Yes, sir. I know I did wrong." "Do you regret what you did?" the judge asked. The boy took a small breath and looked up, his eyes shining with tears. "Every day," he said. "I wish I could go back and find another way." There was a pause, the kind that fills a room like invisible smoke, making everyone hold their breath. The judge leaned back in his chair. He had seen hundreds of faces across that courtroom over the years, but none had ever made him feel like this. He looked down at the case file, then back at the boy. "You said earlier your mother is sick," he said. "Who's taking care of her while you're here?" The question seemed to hit the boy harder than anything else. His voice broke as he whispered, "No one, sir. She's at home alone. I was supposed to be back last night. I don't know if she's okay." The lawyer quickly added, "Your Honor, I've arranged for someone from the community center to check on her. They promised to visit her today." The judge nodded, though the heaviness in his expression didn't fade. He turned his attention back to the boy. "You shouldn't have had to face this alone," he said quietly. "But you did, and you're here now. The truth is, I wish you had someone to guide you before it came to this." The boy didn't answer. He simply sat still, his head lowered again. The courtroom was silent for several moments. Even the audience, who usually came for the drama of trials, seemed moved. Some wiped their eyes. Others looked down, feeling the weight of what they'd just witnessed. Then the judge asked for the store owner to be called as a witness. An older man stood up from the back row, adjusting his jacket as he made his way to the front. He looked stern, with tired eyes that spoke of years of hard work. The judge asked him to take an oath, and then the questioning began. "Do you recognize the boy?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," the man said. "He's the one who came into my store that night." "Did he threaten you or cause any damage?" "No, he didn't even say a word. He just took what he wanted and tried to leave." The lawyer spoke next. "Sir, what did he take?" The man hesitated. "Some medicine, and a loaf of bread." The room went still again. The lawyer nodded gently. "Do you know who the medicine was for?" The man sighed, his eyes softening just a little. "They told me later it was for his mother." "Did that change how you felt?" He looked down. "At first, no. I was angry. My store's been robbed before. But when I heard his story, I didn't know what to think. I have kids too." The lawyer nodded. "If you could speak to him now, what would you say?" The man turned to look at the boy. His face wasn't angry anymore. He looked tired, maybe even sorry. "I'd tell him I wish he'd come to me and asked. I would have helped. I didn't know he was that desperate." The boy finally lifted his head, whispering, "I'm sorry, sir." The store owner nodded slowly. "I know, kid. It was a small moment, but it felt powerful. Two lives that had collided in the worst way were now quietly forgiving each other." The judge sat back, watching in silence. His eyes glistened behind his glasses. He took a deep breath and said, "Thank you, sir. You may step down." When the man left the stand, the judge spoke softly to the boy. "You see, son, sometimes people are willing to help if we just reach out. I know that's not always easy, but it's something to remember." The boy nodded, tears rolling down his cheeks. "Yes, sir." The judge looked down at the table for a moment, then at the defense lawyer. "I'll review everything and make a decision soon," he said. The lawyer thanked him, but her expression showed worry. She knew the judge was wrestling with more than just the law now. He was wrestling with his heart. As the session ended for the day, people began to leave quietly. The usual chatter after a hearing was missing. Everyone seemed lost in their thoughts. The boy was escorted out of the courtroom slowly. Before he reached the door, he turned his head toward the judge. For a brief second, their eyes met again. It wasn't a look of fear or anger. It was something softer, something that carried a silent hope. After the courtroom emptied, the judge sat alone for a long time. The papers were still in front of him, but he didn't look at them. Instead, he stared at the small spot on the table where the boy had been sitting. He thought about the boy's trembling hands, his quiet voice, and the way he held onto that paper like it was his last bit of courage. He thought about the mother waiting at home, sick and unaware of what her son was going through. And he thought about his own life, the times he had seen injustice, the faces he had forgotten, the cases that had become routine. This one didn't feel routine. It felt personal. The sound of rain started tapping softly against the window. The judge leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. He wasn't crying, not yet, but something inside him felt close to breaking. He knew tomorrow would be the day of his final decision, the verdict. And for the first time in his long career, he wasn't sure what justice was supposed to look like anymore. The next morning, the courtroom looked different. The crowd was smaller, but the silence was heavier. It was as if everyone knew something important was about to happen. The boy sat quietly beside his lawyer, his small hands resting on his knees. He hadn't slept much. His eyes looked tired, but there was still a bit of hope hiding behind them, a hope that maybe the judge would see what was really in his heart. The judge entered a few minutes later. He didn't rush to his seat this time. His steps were slower, more thoughtful. He greeted the courtroom softly, then adjusted his glasses and looked straight at the boy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It wasn't the look of a judge at a defendant. It was one human being trying to understand another. "Let's begin," the judge said quietly. The prosecutor stood up, holding the same folder from the day before. His voice wasn't as sharp now. "Your Honor," he said, "this is a simple case on paper, but after hearing the details, I believe this situation deserves special consideration." Everyone in the courtroom looked up in surprise. Even the boy glanced at him, unsure what that meant. The prosecutor continued, "The law is meant to protect, but it's also meant to teach. This boy didn't act with malice or cruelty. He acted out of desperation. I will leave the final judgment to you, Your Honor, but I wanted to say that I see no benefit in sending him to a juvenile center." His words changed the air in the room. The defense lawyer gave a small nod of gratitude. The judge listened without speaking, but his eyes softened slightly. The lawyer then stood up to make her final statement. Her tone was warm and calm, filled with quiet strength. "Your Honor," she began, "when we talk about justice, we often think about punishment. But sometimes justice can also mean giving someone a chance to start over. This boy has lost almost everything, his childhood, his peace, and nearly his hope. But he still has honesty in him. You saw it yesterday when he spoke. You heard it in his voice." She took a small pause, glancing toward the boy. "He's not a criminal. He's a child who tried to save his mother the only way he knew. I ask you, Your Honor, to let compassion guide your judgment today." The courtroom fell quiet again. The judge looked down at his notes for a long time, not writing anything. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock above the door. Finally, he looked up. "Before I make any decision," he said slowly, "I want to hear from the boy one last time. Son, if there's anything left you'd like to say, this is your moment." The boy's heart began to pound. His hands trembled again, just like the first day. He stood up slowly, looking nervous but determined. His lawyer gave him a small nod. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same folded paper. The edges were worn now, showing how many times he had held it. He unfolded it and looked at it for a few seconds before looking up at the judge. "There's something I didn't say yesterday," he began softly. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. "When I went to that store that night, I didn't just go for the medicine. I went because I promised my mom I'd make her better. She told me she didn't want me to worry, but I could see she was in pain. I thought if I could just get that medicine, maybe she'd smile again. I wanted to see her happy, even for one day." He swallowed hard, his eyes filling with tears. "When they caught me, I was scared. Not because I'd get in trouble, but because I couldn't bring the medicine to her. That's the only thing that hurt. I thought I failed her." The courtroom stayed still. Every word he said carried weight. He looked down for a moment, then continued, his voice even softer. I haven't seen her since that night. They took me here before I could go home. I keep thinking about her every minute. I don't know if she's okay. I just hope she knows I didn't do it for myself. I did it for her." He looked up, his voice trembling.
"I know what I did was wrong."
"I don't want to run away from it. I just want to make it right. If I get another chance, I'll work, I'll study, I'll do anything. I just want her to be proud of me again." His last words hung in the air. The judge looked down, trying to steady his breathing. His fingers tapped the table once, twice, then stopped. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the reporters who had come to write stories had lowered their pens. The boy added quietly, "I don't hate the man from the store. He was right to call the police. I just wish I had asked for help instead. Maybe things would be different." His voice broke then, and he covered his face with his hands. The lawyer gently placed her hand on his shoulder, whispering, "It's okay. You did good." The judge closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, his voice was low and thick with emotion. "Son," he said, "your words, they're hard to hear." The boy looked up slowly, unsure what that meant. The judge continued, his tone breaking slightly. "I've sat in this seat for many years. I've heard confessions, lies, and every kind of excuse. But I don't think I've ever heard anything like what you just said. You've reminded me that behind every case there's a life, a story, and a heart that feels pain." He stopped for a second, took off his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. The room was silent. He looked up again, his eyes shining with tears that he didn't try to hide. "I'm supposed to make decisions based on the law," he said. "But the law doesn't always see what's inside a person. Sometimes it misses the truth." He leaned forward slightly. "You didn't come here to lie or escape. You came here to tell the truth. And that means something. It means you still have goodness in you." The boy nodded, his lips trembling. "Thank you, sir." The judge sat back, staring at him quietly for a moment. His voice softened. "You said you wanted to make your mother proud. I think she already is." Those words broke the silence. The boy covered his face again, crying quietly. The lawyer beside him wiped her eyes too. Even the prosecutor looked away, blinking hard. The judge cleared his throat, his voice barely steady. "I need some time before I give my final decision. We'll meet again tomorrow." He struck the gavel softly, then stood up. But he didn't walk away right away. He looked once more at the boy and said quietly, "You've done something very brave today. Don't forget that." As the courtroom emptied, the boy sat there for a moment, unable to move. His lawyer whispered, "You did what most people can't. You spoke with your heart." He nodded slowly, still wiping tears from his cheeks. When he was escorted out, the judge stayed behind in his chair. The sound of the door closing echoed across the room. He sat there, alone now, staring at the empty table where the boy had been sitting. He thought about his own childhood, about how easy it was to take love for granted. He thought about the boy's letter, so full of pain and honesty, and about how easily the world overlooks children like him. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence fill the room. Then for the first time in a long while, he whispered to himself, "Maybe justice isn't only about punishment. Maybe it's about understanding." He stayed there until the light outside faded, lost in thought. For the first time in years, the man who had given countless verdicts couldn't find one that felt right. The next day, the courtroom was even quieter than before. There were fewer reporters, fewer people on the benches. It felt as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what was about to happen. The boy arrived with his lawyer, still looking small and fragile, but his eyes carried determination. He knew today would change everything. The judge entered slower than usual and paused at the doorway. His robe swayed lightly as he walked to his seat, but he didn't take his usual commanding stance. Instead, he leaned slightly on the bench as if bracing himself for what he knew he might hear. His face was calm, but his eyes held a weight that hadn't been there the first day. Once the courtroom was quiet, the judge spoke. "Before we proceed, I need to ask one question about your mother," he said, turning to the boy. "How is she now?" The boy hesitated. His lips quivered. He looked down at the floor. The room went silent again, sensing the importance of this moment. He began, his voice breaking. "She passed away last night." A gasp echoed softly through the courtroom. Even the reporters, trained to remain neutral, covered their mouths in surprise. The defense lawyer placed her hand gently on the boy's arm. offering silent comfort. The judge closed his eyes for a long moment. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glasses, then stopped. When he spoke again, his voice was low and unsteady. I am very sorry." The boy's shoulders shook and he buried his face in his hands, crying softly. He didn't need to speak. Everyone understood the depth of his grief. For the first time, the judge allowed himself to feel the weight of the situation fully. He had seen sadness, despair, and loss before, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a case of breaking the law. This was a young life being torn apart by circumstances beyond his control. The judge leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the bench. His voice, though still soft, carried a strength born of emotion. "Son, I know words don't make pain disappear. I know there's nothing I can say that will bring her back. But I want you to know that what you did was not meant to harm anyone. Your heart was always in the right place, even if your actions led to consequences." The boy lifted his head slightly, tears streaking his face. I just wanted to help her," he whispered. "I know," the judge said quietly, his own voice trembling. "I can see that. And it makes me think about what justice really is. Justice is not always about punishment. Sometimes it's about understanding, about compassion, and about helping someone who made a mistake because they didn't know another way." The boy's lawyer stepped forward gently. "Your Honor, I know this is difficult, but this is a chance for all of us to show that the system can do more than punish. It can give someone a chance to heal and grow." The judge nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the boy. He reached for his gavel, then paused. The room was silent. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his emotions. But the weight of the boy's story, the loss of his mother, and the courage it took to speak the truth pressed heavily on him. Finally, he spoke, his voice cracking slightly. "I have sat in this courtroom for decades. I have heard thousands of cases, and I have always prided myself on being fair and firm. But today is different. Today I am reminded that behind every case there is a human life, a heart that feels, and a story that deserves to be heard fully." The boy looked up at the judge, sensing the raw honesty in his words. He didn't speak, but the tears in his eyes reflected the depth of his emotions. The judge continued, "You have shown bravery that few people ever do. You spoke the truth even when it was hard. You accepted responsibility, even when the consequences were frightening. That courage, that honesty, it cannot be ignored." He paused, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "I will not make the mistake of seeing you only as someone who broke the law. You are a boy who tried in the only way you knew how to care for someone you loved. That matters more than any rule in the book." The courtroom was completely still. Even the reporters lowered their pens. The audience was silent, absorbing every word, feeling the weight of what was being said. The judge then addressed the boy directly. "Son, I cannot bring your mother back, but I can make a choice that will give you a chance to honor her memory, to grow, to heal, and to live a life that she would be proud of." The boy's lips trembled. He tried to speak but couldn't. He simply nodded, unable to find words for the mixture of grief, relief, and hope that filled him. The judge leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. "We will focus on your rehabilitation, on helping you learn, grow, and contribute to your community. You will have guidance, support, and the chance to rebuild your life. That is what justice looks like in this courtroom today," the defense lawyer whispered softly. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge nodded, then turned to the courtroom. "I hope everyone here can understand what we are trying to do today. Sometimes the law must bend to the truth of the human heart, and that is what we are doing." He struck the gavel, but the sound was different this time. Not a symbol of punishment, but a signal of understanding. The boy stood there, still trembling, but with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. The judge watched him for a long moment, remembering the fear and pain in those small hands, the courage it took to speak honestly, and the heartbreaking loss of his mother. He realized that this case would stay with him forever, not because of the law, but because of the boy who had reminded him what it truly meant to be human. When the courtroom emptied, the boy's lawyer guided him out. They walked slowly, allowing him to process what had happened. The judge remained at his bench for a while longer, looking at the empty seat where the boy had sat. He touched the gavel lightly, as if acknowledging the weight of the decision he had just made. Outside, the rain had started again. The drops tapped softly against the windows, a quiet reminder that life continues even after loss and heartbreak. The judge watched it for a moment, thinking about the boy, his mother, and the path that lay ahead. He knew the boy would face challenges, but he also knew that courage, honesty, and compassion could guide him through. He finally rose, putting on his glasses and straightening his robe. As he walked out of the courtroom, he whispered to himself, "Sometimes the hardest cases teach us the most about life." And with that, he left, carrying with him the memory of a boy who had shown bravery beyond his years, and a lesson that would stay with him forever: that justice and compassion are not enemies, but companions in understanding the human heart. The next day, the courtroom felt lighter than it had in days. Word had spread about the boy's story, but the atmosphere wasn't tense or judgmental anymore. People who had come out of curiosity now felt quiet respect for what had happened here. Not just for the law being followed, but for the truth being honored. The boy arrived with his lawyer, holding himself a little taller than before. Though his grief was still fresh, there was a sense of calm in his posture, as if he carried with him the courage he had shown over the past 2 days. He knew today was the day of the judge's final decision, and he prepared himself for whatever would come. The judge entered quietly. His steps were deliberate, and the calm he usually carried seemed steadier, though softer now. He adjusted his glasses, took a deep breath, and looked at the boy. For a brief moment, their eyes met. No words were needed, the connection was understood. "Good morning," the judge began, his voice firm yet gentle. "We are here today to conclude this hearing. I have considered everything: the facts, the circumstances, and most importantly, the words spoken by the young man before me." He paused, letting the silence settle. The courtroom was completely still. Before making a decision, the judge continued, "I want to speak directly to the boy. Son, the past few days have shown me the courage, honesty, and humanity within you. You have faced fear, grief, and responsibility far beyond your years, and yet you stood tall, even when the weight of the world seemed unbearable." The boy's eyes glistened with tears. He nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. "You told the truth about your actions, about your mother, and about your own fears. You did not seek to hide behind excuses or lies. That honesty," the judge said, voice thick with emotion, "is the first step toward building a life that can honor her memory and your own potential." He leaned forward slightly. "I will not send you to a juvenile center. That path is not what justice requires in this situation. Instead, I am ordering that you participate in community support programs, attend counseling, and continue your education with guidance from a mentor. You will also perform community service to learn responsibility and compassion firsthand." The boy blinked in disbelief. "Sir, really?" he whispered. "Yes," the judge said softly. "This is a chance for you to grow, to learn, and to honor your mother's memory. Mistakes do not define who we are. How we respond to them does. Today you have the chance to show what kind of person you truly are." The defense lawyer whispered words of encouragement. "You heard him," she said gently. "This is your chance." Tears ran freely down the boy's cheeks, but this time they were mixed with relief, gratitude, and a quiet sense of hope. He nodded, unable to speak, and folded his hands together. The judge then addressed the courtroom. "I hope everyone here understands that justice is not always punishment. Sometimes it is guidance, sometimes it is mercy, and sometimes it is recognizing that a young heart still has time to heal and grow." He struck the gavel softly. The sound was different this time. Not a signal of fear or authority, but a gentle acknowledgement that the right decision had been made. The boy's lawyer guided him to stand. He took a deep breath, feeling the tension leave his shoulders for the first time in days. People in the courtroom, some strangers, some neighbors, gave him quiet nods of respect. No applause, just a shared understanding of what had happened. Outside the courtroom, the air felt fresher. The boy stepped out slowly, still holding on to his folded paper, now a symbol of courage rather than fear. His lawyer stayed close, offering comfort and guidance. A volunteer from the community center was waiting to take him to a safe place, to ensure he had support and guidance. The boy looked back once, thinking about the empty courtroom, the judge who had seen him as more than a mistake, and the lessons he would carry forward. The judge stayed in the courtroom a little longer. He touched the gavel lightly, remembering the small hands, the trembling voice, and the letter that had changed everything. He realized that this case would stay with him forever, not because it was difficult, but because it reminded him of the core of his work, the human heart. In the following weeks, The boy began attending the community programs the judge had assigned. He met a mentor who guided him, helping him focus on his studies and teaching him ways to cope with grief. He volunteered at local centers, helping others in small but meaningful ways. With each act, he learned the power of compassion and the value of second chances. Though the loss of his mother left a permanent ache, he found strength in the lessons he had learned and in the support around him. Every time he helped someone, every time he shared his story to prevent another child from making the same mistakes, he felt a connection to her, a quiet way to honor her memory. The judge, too, carried the lessons from this case forward. He became more patient, more willing to see the story behind every face in his courtroom. He often thought of the boy, hoping that the path he had chosen would lead him to a life of kindness, courage, and understanding. Months later, the boy returned to the courtroom, not as a defendant, but as a young man with confidence, learning, and hope in his eyes. He approached the judge quietly, bowed slightly, and whispered, "Thank you, sir." The judge smiled, a small, warm smile. "You're welcome," he said. "Remember, the courage you showed is what will guide you forward." And with that, the courtroom, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now held a quiet sense of hope. The story of a young boy, a grieving mother, and a judge who allowed compassion to guide justice became a memory that would stay with everyone who witnessed it. A reminder that even in the hardest moments, humanity can shine brighter than any law. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, casting a warm light on the courthouse steps. The boy walked forward, carrying the lessons of the past, ready to face the future with honesty, courage, and a heart full of hope. And the judge, watching from the doorway, knew that sometimes the hardest cases taught the most important lessons, that justice, when guided by empathy, could heal even the deepest wounds. Months passed, and life slowly began to find a rhythm for the boy. He no longer walked through the streets with fear in his eyes or the weight of hopelessness on his shoulders. Instead, he carried something new, purpose. The programs the judge had assigned became a part of his life. He learned to manage his grief, to help others, and to see small acts of kindness as powerful tools to change the world around him. He often visited the local community center, tutoring younger children who faced challenges similar to his own. He shared his story not to seek sympathy, but to teach them that mistakes didn't define who they were. Honesty, courage, and determination did. Even though the memory of his mother remained a quiet ache in his heart, he felt her presence in the choices he made. Every time he helped someone, every time he learned something new, every time he smiled despite the pain, he felt connected to her, like a promise kept. The judge, too, heard occasional updates from the community center. He smiled each time he read a report of the boy's progress. That case, once one of the heaviest in his career, had become a beacon of hope in his mind. It reminded him why he became a judge in the first place, not just to enforce laws, but to protect the humanity in every case he encountered. One afternoon, the boy returned to the courthouse, this time not as a defendant but as a visitor. He walked up the steps with confidence, clutching a small notebook in his hand. He passed the same courtroom where fear and grief had once consumed him and paused at the door. He looked around, remembering the judge's voice, the people who had been silent witnesses, and the courage it took to speak the truth. When he saw the judge in his chambers, he approached quietly. "Sir," he said, bowing slightly, "I wanted to thank you again for everything." The judge looked at him, now taller and steadier, and nodded. "You did all the work yourself. I only tried to guide you, but I am proud of how far you've come." The boy smiled, a real confident smile, the kind that could light a room. "I'm learning, sir. I'm really trying, and I want to make her proud every day." The judge watched him go, thinking about how far both of them had come. The boy, growing into a life full of promise, and the judge, reminded of the power of empathy and compassion. That day the courthouse was quiet, but it carried a different kind of sound, a sound of hope, resilience, and the quiet proof that even the darkest moments could lead to light. And somewhere inside both of them, there was a shared understanding that the boy's courage had changed not only his life, but also the hearts of those who had witnessed it. A story that had begun in fear and pain had grown into a lesson of love, humanity, and the enduring power of compassion. Years passed. The boy, once small and trembling, had grown into a young man with a quiet strength in his eyes. The grief of losing his mother never fully left him, but it had transformed into determination. He had learned to carry it as a reminder of why he must live with honesty, kindness, and courage. He had continued his education, supported by mentors and community programs that had once guided him. He often visited the places that had helped him, tutoring children, volunteering at shelters, and sharing his story with those who felt lost or alone. His life had become a testament to resilience, showing that one mistake did not define a person, and that honesty and courage could create new paths even in the darkest moments. Every time he told his story, he noticed the same emotions he had once felt in the courtroom: fear, doubt, and guilt, reflected in the eyes of others. But he spoke not with shame, but with hope. "I made mistakes," he would say, "but I learned that it's never too late to choose the right path. Compassion and courage can guide you, even when the world seems unfair." The judge had retired some years earlier, but he never forgot the boy who had spoken so bravely in his courtroom. Occasionally, letters arrived from him, describing the young man's achievements, his small acts of kindness, and how he had grown into someone his mother would have been proud of. Each letter reminded the judge why empathy mattered just as much as the law. One day, the young man returned to the courthouse, not as a visitor, but to speak at a community event. Children, teenagers, and adults gathered to hear him talk about resilience, responsibility, and hope. Standing at the same spot where he had once been terrified, he spoke with calm and clarity. "I learned," he said, "that even when life seems impossible, there is always a way to make it better. I made mistakes, yes, but people saw the good in me, and they gave me guidance and trust. That made all the difference. Compassion can change lives." The audience listened in silence, some wiping tears from their eyes. They could feel the journey he had taken, the fear, the loss, the courage, and the transformation. And somewhere, far in the back, the retired judge smiled quietly, remembering the day the boy had first spoken in the courtroom. He realized that decisions made with understanding, empathy, and humanity had ripple effects that could last a lifetime. One act of compassion had created a life of purpose, a story of resilience, and a reminder that even the smallest heart could change the world. The young man left the courthouse that day with a sense of peace. He carried the memory of his mother, the lessons from the judge, and the hope of making a difference. His life had been changed by one moment of truth, and he would spend every day honoring it. And in that quiet courthouse, the echo of courage, honesty, and compassion remained, proof that even in the darkest stories, light could find its way. Years after the courtroom events, the boy's story had quietly spread across the community. People spoke of him not as someone who had made a mistake, but as a young man who had shown honesty, courage, and resilience. His journey became a symbol of hope, proof that even the hardest situations could be transformed by truth, compassion, and guidance. He began speaking at schools, community centers, and youth programs. Children who faced struggles similar to his own listened with rapt attention. He shared the lessons he had learned, that asking for help was not a weakness, that mistakes could be turned into opportunities, and that the courage to speak honestly could change lives. "Sometimes life gives you impossible choices," he would say, "but even then you can choose kindness, you can choose honesty, and you can choose hope. I learned that the hard way, and it changed my life." Teachers, mentors, and local leaders started to see the impact of his story. Programs were created to support children in need, ensuring that no young person would feel entirely alone or desperate. Small acts of compassion multiplied and communities grew stronger. The retired judge occasionally heard updates from those programs. Every letter or report reminded him of the boy's courage, and how one decision in a courtroom had set off a ripple effect that changed many lives. He often reflected on the moment the boy had spoken those heartfelt words, and he realized that sometimes the law's greatest power came not from punishment, but from understanding and empathy. The young man himself carried the lessons into adulthood. He never forgot the fear, grief, and responsibility that had weighed on him, but he transformed that pain into purpose. He became someone who reached out to others, who listened to stories of struggle, and who inspired courage in those who needed it most. On quiet evenings, he would sit and write, recording his experiences, his lessons, and the stories of those he had helped. He wanted to make sure that anyone who felt lost could find hope in his words. He knew now that even the smallest voice could be powerful if it spoke the truth. And so, the boy who had once stood trembling in a courtroom became a beacon of light in his community. His story, of love for his mother, bravery in the face of fear, and the compassion of a judge who saw beyond the law, lived on. It inspired others to act with empathy, to understand before judging, and to remember that the human heart is more powerful than any rule. In the end, the boy's journey showed everyone that even in the darkest times, honesty, courage, and compassion could create a legacy that would last forever. His story became a quiet reminder that one act of understanding could change not only one life, but countless others in ways no one could ever predict.